Winston Churchill, who knew all too well, without American involvement in the war, he would soon lose to Germany, began to work with President Wilson and the bankers on the false flag that would force the American people to support the war. The sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania, while built as a British passenger ocean liner, had been retrofitted with armor, revolving gun rings on its decks, and was classified by the British Navy as an armored auxiliary cruiser. Its lower passenger compartments had been removed to make room for the war munitions exported by America's industrial military complex. Churchill ordered the Lusitania and all ships to ignore orders from German U-boats to halt and be searched, and instead to engage the German U-boats or even ram them without warning. He also ordered crews not to treat captured U-boat crews as prisoners of war, but to execute them. This left the German Navy with only one option: to sink ships suspected of delivering war munitions on sight. The Lusitania, whose previous captain resigned over Churchill's plan to use passengers as human shields, was loaded with weapons and ammunition sold by the J.P. Morgan Company in violation of every neutrality treaty. The German embassy in Washington filed a complaint to the Wilson administration and was ignored. The Germans went so far as to attempt to run ads in American newspapers warning Americans not to board the weapon-carrying ship traveling through a war zone, but the papers controlled by the bankers and by order of the State Department refused to run the ads. Using the media as a weapon against the people is not a new thing. The bankers and the politicians they owned were purposely sending unaware Americans right into a deadly trap. The so-called passenger liner, carrying over 6 million rounds of ammunition, was directed by the British Navy into an area where a German U-boat had recently fired upon 2 ships and was known to be active. To ensure the ship would be vulnerable, the destroyer that was supposed to escort the cargo to port was called back without notifying the Lusitania, leaving her a sitting duck in hostile waters. And on May 7th, 1915, close to 2,000 passengers, including 195 Americans, were sacrificed to the bankers as the German U-boat, U-20, fired at the hull, setting off a massive explosion when the munitions in the cargo ripped a hole so large in her starboard bow that one of the largest ships ever built sank in less than 18 minutes. The Lusitania was purposely loaded full of explosives and then led defenselessly into hostile waters in the hopes that it would be sunk by the Germans. This was the false flag that propelled America into what would become known as World War I, a war that easily could have ended before claiming the lives of over 100,000 Americans that died so that the military-industrial complex and the banking class could avoid losing money on a profitable war. A war that would later lead to another world war that would claim the lives of millions. All this so bankers could grow fat on the blood of the people that would line up for the slaughter, war after war after war. The details of this false flag have been largely hidden from the public. In fact, as recently as 1993, the official story was that the Lusitania had exploded because of coal dust in the boiler rooms, and that it had not been carrying ammunition or explosives. The real story remained hidden from the public for nearly 100 years, until in 2008 when divers found millions of rounds in the hull of the sunken wreckage. The media had successfully covered up a false flag for nearly a century, a fact that completely obliterates the notion that false flags involve too many people, and that surely someone would talk, and that the truth would get out. People who don't know their history are damned to repeat it. Do we have to wait another century before we get the truth of modern false flags perpetrated by the bankers and the deep state? When will the people stop confirming the ruling class's belief that we are all just cattle to be slaughtered for profit? Slaves that unknowingly prop them up and support their lifestyle of decadence and degeneracy, fighting for table scraps and vying for the coveted position as alpha slave, while the ruling class looks down at us not in pity, but with amusement and disgust. The technocrats are developing new ways to control us and eventually make us obsolete. We are rapidly approaching a future in which the ruling class will have successfully replaced us with lower IQ populations that are easier to control and easier to replace with automation. We must stop them now and expose them for who they are now, because we don't have another century to wait for the truth to come out. It's not just about the deaths on the Lusitania. It's not about the deaths in World War I, which led to all the deaths in World War II. World War II led to the deaths of nearly 500,000 American men. American men that might not have voted for the Immigration Act of 1965. And lest we forget, without World War II, there would have been no baby boom. That decision by those bankers, the Wilson administration and Churchill, to sacrifice the lives of unwitting pawns in their war profiteering game so they could increase their profits. The effects of that evil decision have irreversibly damaged this nation in every measurable way. And look at the British now, arresting people for thought crimes. The fairy tale that we were protecting freedom was always a lie. The truth is, we live in a system that rewards sociopaths, and sociopaths do what's good for them.